Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, my lovely students. It's time for us to talk about a character by the name of Shi Huangdi. Shi Huangdi is without question the most fascinating, interesting, brutal, constructive dictator that you've never heard of. And we're watching the First Emperor video. We did some reading on Shi Huangdi. We're doing a project on Shi Huangdi. There's lots of stuff on Shi Huangdi. He's the father of China. So let's dive into him pretty deep here. Let's talk about Shi Huangdi. So let's get started here. Before we can do anything, we got to lay out some essential questions like we always do. And I have 4 of them for this presentation. The first one was, why was Shi Huangdi so successful at creating this incredible empire in this chaotic situation? Why? Why did he succeed? Next is, what are the benefits to Shi Huangdi's ruthless rule of China? The next question would be, what would be the negatives to Shi Huangdi's ruthless rule of China? And he is ruthless, baby. And the final question is, why in the world would this empire be so short-lived? I mean, just 4 years after Shi Huangdi's death, his entire empire collapses. His dynasty ends. So I have to give you some information for that. And so before we move on to the next topic, I want you to think about this amazing quote. It applies to so much of human existence. Desperate times call for desperate solutions. When I think of World War II, the United States of America forms an alliance with the Soviet Union. We have nothing in common except for our hatred and fear and determination to destroy Adolf Hitler. Perfect example. So keep that quote in mind as we go forward. So here's our hero, Zhao Sheng, who was born in 259. He died in 210 BCE, before the Common Era. He lived in a chaotic time. I'm going to show you a map of China. This is a map of China in 260 BCE. This is a time called the Warring States period. You know, it's just constant turf battles between various provinces. And so what this character Zhao Sheng is going to do is he is going to unify these states. Now, when you look at this map, you notice that there is one large state called, or spelled Qin, and it's pronounced Qin, like what's below your mouth. This is where Zhao Sheng's from, who's going to later become Shi Huangdi. He's going to use this province as a base of operations to spread out his influence and dominance throughout China, and he's going to unify China in the process, not unlike what Alexander the Great did in Greece after the Peloponnesian War. Take a chaotic situation and unify it under his control. So we're going back to our original question when the presentation started. How did Shi Huangdi, Zhao Sheng, how did he obtain power? How did he come to dominate China? And what we have to do is we have to step back to the province of Qin. And he is going to do it through the use of 2 tactics. Now remember, folks, early civilization were situated along river valleys. So a big struggle for those early civilizations was, how do you control the river? And I'm talking about controlling the river in 2 ways. Number 1, how do you control flooding? And number 2, in dry times, how do you extract this valuable water resource and spread it out into farming fields? So flood control and irrigation. And what he's going to do is he is going to institute one of the world's first great public works programs. And that's the building of canals and retention ponds, which do 2 things. They allow you to store excess water so it doesn't do damage to towns and farming fields. And number 2, those retention ponds, then you can utilize them during drought by irrigating parched fields. Now, I have to tell you something. This benefited everyone in the state of Qin. Everyone benefited when Zhao Sheng went on this quest. So here's this guy who just seems totally self-serving, and yet by pursuing his own self-interest, everyone benefits. This made him immensely popular, particularly with the poor people who tended to suffer the most during natural disasters like drought or flooding. So tactic 1, control the river through public works processes. So I talked about tactic number 1, which is flood control and irrigation. Tactic number 2 is utterly brilliant. See, there's this concept throughout history in many civilizations called primogeniture. And primogeniture is the idea that you want to maintain your family's wealth after you pass. So in primogeniture, what happens is if you have this large holding of land and wealth, the entire thing goes to your oldest son. And by doing that, your estate is not divided up. It's kept intact. Now, what Shi Huangdi is going to do, and this is just brilliant, is he's going to end this process. He is going to end this program. He is going to outlaw it. In other words, he's going to take these large estates and he's going to break them up and give them to poor people. Isn't that amazing? Now, one thing that Shi Huangdi gets, and I mean he gets it, is there's a heck of a lot more poor people than there are rich people. And if you can get the poor people on your side and empower them and make them feel like they can be victorious, you can overwhelm the few rich people. Now, this is a tactic that's used very successfully throughout world history. But Zhao Sheng seems to get this at a very, very early stage. So ending primogeniture is going to endear him to the vast masses of the population. Brilliant. Not only is ending primogeniture going to endear him to the masses, to the peasants, to the poor people, to the vast majority of the population who are going to benefit tremendously from this, but it's also going to remove a historic threat to all strong monarchs, and that would be empowered nobles, people who are talented, people who have some wealth, people who could band together and take you down. So by eliminating these people, these nobles as a potential threat, once again, Zhao Sheng is really going to consolidate his power. So the sole theme with tactic number 2 seems to be redistribution of wealth, win over the masses. And the masses were all about the public works programs that controlled the river, but they loved ending primogeniture. And so he's going to do one other aspect to this, and it's hugely important, and that's going to be, and this is very like Alexander the Great and what he did in Macedonia and then Greece, he is going to create an unbelievably disciplined and loyal army. And the way he's going to do that is he is going to recruit poor farm boys who have nothing going on in life, and then he's going to give them the opportunity to rise through the ranks based on merit. And this is going to be an absolutely dynamite combination. The image you see right here is of Shi Huangdi's terracotta soldiers, and you're going to learn about that in the video, and it's just a great story. It's somewhat like ancient Egypt, creating this mass army that's going to help you in the other world. So the other part of tactic 2 is to create this amazing army. So when it comes to Zhao Sheng, I want you to think about his experiences of consolidating power in the province of Qin like a template. In other words, he's going to apply the same model to the rest of China, and he is going to expand outside of the province of Qin and conquer the neighboring provinces, and he is going to create an incredible, unified, disciplined, enthusiastic, the masses enthusiastic empire by using this template that he mastered or created in the province of Qin. Zhao Sheng was very successful in conquering neighboring provinces and creating this huge empire in eastern China. And he did something very cool. He did a lot of things very interesting, but I like this one. This one's cool. He didn't want to copy his Zhou or Shang predecessors by calling himself a king. He called himself something different. The first splendid emperor. Isn't that beautiful, my friends? And Chinese monarchs are going to be called this for the next 2,000 years. So Shi Huangdi, that's the new title. The first splendid emperor of this unified, disciplined empire in eastern China in the year 220 BCE. Sad part, it's only going to last for 10 years. A big part of Shi Huangdi's rule is standardization. And once again, standardization is going to be one of those things that helps the masses. No question about it. He could be considered, American students might think of George Washington, the person who consolidated China. The word China comes from his province, Qin. But as you're going to learn, he had some quirks about him. He's more like George Washington from hell. Because some of the things that he's going to do are very brutal in terms of consolidating his rule and creating power. But he is the man who creates this concept of a Chinese identity that's been with the world for thousands of years. So Shi Huangdi is going to set about to create this nation out of these diverse, spread out, warring states in China. And again, he's going to create this Chinese identity, a lot of it through standardization. And I'm going to get specific here with standardization, and you can see how comprehensive this effort was. Started out with weights and measures. Hugely important thing that people take for granted. If somebody, take the United States for instance, if Ohio used miles and Pennsylvania used kilometers, it would be extremely confusing, not conducive to business. It would just not be a positive thing. It would not bond the two states together. And so standard weights and measurements throughout his empire was huge. In addition to this, weights and measures, there's also standardized coins. Now you think about the United States, once again, I'm talking about the United States a lot here as a source of reference, but think about the United States right after the Revolutionary War, before the Constitution was written. One of the big issues was standardization of money. When each colony had its own system of money, there was no cohesion in the 13 colonies after the Revolutionary War ended. Shi Huangdi erected a standard legal code, which is the basis of all civilizations. And I'm going to tell you something. Standardized legal codes can be very harsh, but their very consistency is positive, particularly for poor people who sometimes get abused with nepotism and favoritism of all sorts. Now, I can't underestimate this. He standardized writing in China. Also, this standardization effort got so in-depth and so detailed, he even standardized the length of axles on carts. So all these things put together create this cohesion and this Chinese identity. Shi Huangdi also created this Chinese identity, this cohesion, through the construction of massive public works. And these public works not only employed a lot of people, but they also dramatically benefited the Chinese economy, facilitating the movement of products, the movement of people, transportation, the movement of ideas, which helped bond the country. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is he constructed a system of roads which rivaled that of the Roman Empire. And the Romans were constructing their roads at about the same time. So number one, he developed a wonderful highway system. Shi Huangdi did some amazing public works, but I consider this the most impressive, the most significant. Most transportation was done at this time in China along river valleys. And the Yangtze River drains from west to east, massive river valley in the central part of China. The Xizang River drains the southern part of China, and it flows from northwest to southeast. But we're talking about a massive area in between the two. And so what Shi Huangdi does is he builds a canal that links up tributaries of the Yangtze, which run north, and tributaries of the Xizang River, which runs south. He links these tributaries up with a man-made waterway, and it permitted someone to travel by boat 1,200 miles from the latitude of Beijing all the way down to Hong Kong. And this was truly one of the most significant engineering achievements at the world of that time, linking two massive river valleys with a man-made waterway. The last great public works project that I want to discuss when it comes to Shi Huangdi is the Great Wall of China. Now, creating safety and security for the population is another thing that's going to endear you to them, and that was certainly the case during the Qin dynasty. Here's something I want you to understand. Invaders, nomadic invaders from the north, Mongolia, is going to be a typical issue in ancient China. So the creation of these walls is a way to keep those invaders out, and successfully keeping those invaders out is going to mean that you have a successful monarchy in China. It's a common theme throughout history. Now, there's an urban legend that you can see the Great Wall of China from space. Look how wide it is. If you can see that from space, you can see the sidewalk out in front of our school from space. So don't get too wound up with that. So now I want to talk about Li Sai's dedication to this concept of legalism. And what I have here, and you might remember this from the video and the reading, is a two-handled piece of pottery. Two handles is what legalism is all about. And the two handles, of course, are punishment and reward, which is very basic to understand. You reward those people who do what you want. You punish those people brutally that do what you don't, and that's the way you control people. It looks at human nature in a very negative way, whereas Confucianism would look at human nature as positive. All you need is a great role model. And Taoism would say, what's all this talk about positive and negative? It's ridiculous. You're just part of nature. But legalism is all about human nature is bad. Human nature is negative. And there's a couple of individuals that I want to highlight when we talk about this. The first one is a man called Han Fei, who is credited with articulating legalist views. And he was from a neighboring province called Han. He was impressed with Shi Huangdi, becomes part of his administration, I guess you could say, and immediately becomes a casualty because there's another character by the name of Li Sai, who was very prominent in the movie, terrible person in the movie. And this guy looks at Han Fei as a potential threat, plays some Machiavellian politics with him. And if you may have heard that phrase before, Machiavelli is this Italian politician who used every advantage he could and was unconcerned about the victims of his goals. So Li Sai gets rid of Han Fei. But if you watch that movie, and if you watched it closely, as soon as Shi Huangdi dies, Li Sai is going to get his. And I'm going to talk about that momentarily. A contemporary figure that I like to compare Li Sai to is Joseph Stalin had a director of secret police. You may have never heard of this person, called Lavrentiy Beria. And as soon as Stalin died, Beria was an absolute goner, and they had people lining up that wanted to take this guy out. Very similar to Li Sai, and you saw that in the video. What you didn't see in the video was how the Qin survivors made an example out of him. Now, once they found out, the descendants of Shi Huangdi, that Li Sai was trying to rig the deck for his own benefit, you saw the part where his sons went through a brief power struggle. They decided to put an end to this nasty person. And they subject him to something called the 5 punishments. And this embodies the whole ideas about legalism and punishment. You wanted punishment to be very public. You wanted punishment to be an example. You wanted it to be ultra intimidating. So here are the 5 right now. This is what Li Sai was subject to. The first one is called Mo. This is where you have your face tattooed. Now, some of you guys might think that that's kind of cool, but it's not like you get to choose the images. It's something along the lines of, I'm a traitor, look at me. So after you have Mo, then comes Yi, which is have your nose cut off, which, believe it or not, is still done in some barbaric parts of the world. Very shaming, very painful. After this, you have one of your lower legs removed. It's called Yu. And I don't know how they keep people from bleeding to death. They must elevate their legs so they don't bleed to death. But this is just nightmarish, just satanic. After that, you're subjected to Gong, which is full castration. Not just the testicles, but the penis as well. So at this point, you don't have a nose, you don't have sex organs, you don't have a foot. Your face is tattooed. It's hard to imagine that you could survive to this point. But thankfully, then you're subjected to Da, which is being pulled apart by horses traveling in different directions rapidly, which, I'll be honest with you, I would think would be a relief by this point. So Shi Huangdi dies in 210 BCE. The Qin dynasty lasted for just 4 more years. You saw what happened to Li Sai. And the question is, why? I mean, why was this empire that forged this Chinese identity, that brought about so much prosperity, why was it so short-lived? And I think a lot of the answer comes from the video. Shi Huangdi was obsessed with immortality. He was obsessed with his rule. And he didn't do anything to build institutions of government that would survive after his death. I mean, he was big on institutions. He was big on standardization. But there was nothing like the American Constitution, per se. And I'm sorry I'm using the United States so much as an example here. But in 1974, Richard Nixon resigned from office. In many parts of the world, that would have led to revolution, coup d'etats. Not in the United States, because we have this institution called the Constitution, which lays the groundwork for the next administration. There was nothing like that in Qin China. So within 4 years, the dynasty, there was no dynasty, was over. The rule of the Qin was over, and it's going to usher in a time period called the Han Dynasty, which is going to turn away from legalism. So the lesson in all that is political institutions need to outlive popular rulers.